Tonight on Nation to Nation, future of First Nations child welfare is being decided in Calgary. Ontario's regional chief supports the AFN plan.
We have negotiated different elements into this agreement, and I think that are beneficial.
The Tsilhqot'in Nation asked chiefs to vote against the deal, saying it fails to hold Ottawa accountable on a lot of issues.
Canada's done some very harmful things to our people in the past, and they have to pay. So why let them off the hook?
And the Caring Society's executive director, Cindy Blackstock, also says the deal is flawed, so it expires after 10 years.
We're already in year one of it. We have 9 years left, and there's nothing binding to hold Canada accountable for not hurting our kids after that.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. Chiefs from across the country and Calgary this week to vote on a $47.8 billion draft final settlement agreement on long-term child welfare reform. The agreement was negotiated between Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak and the federal government earlier this year. I'm in Calgary myself, and joining me now is AFN Regional Chief for Ontario, Abram Benedict, who supports the agreement. Thanks for joining us here at the Special Chiefs Assembly in Calgary.
Absolutely, no. Glad to be here.
Right, of course, everyone's talking about the FSAA today, and as part of this agreement and stuff. And I know you made some arguments in the plenary at the Assembly yesterday. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you were trying to, or the arguments you're trying to make to the Chiefs?
Absolutely. Well, I'm not sure that it's an argument. It really is the position of our region. And what I've articulated to the Assembly here is the Ontario position, and that is that, one, Ontario is very unique in the child welfare sector. One, that we do have a significant amount of our communities are northern. And so either by road, seasonal road, or fly-in communities. And from a service delivery aspect, that is a very unique consideration for cost of delivery. And so in the child welfare is no different. And so there's a significant cost of delivering services, whether it be prevention or protection services to remote communities. And so we have ensured that through this offer, or the settlement, or the reform package that's being proposed, that the remote communities are considered. And so one of our messages bringing to the Assembly was exactly that through this proposed agreement is that regardless if it's an Ontario northern community or another community in one of the other regions, there's a consideration to that. And so as well, in Ontario, there's a bilateral agreement between Ontario and the federal government for 4 areas of service to First Nation communities, and one of them is child welfare. And so it's called the 1965 Indian Welfare Agreement. And so we wanted to make sure that as this settlement or proposed reform package is considered, that the uniqueness of Ontario was considered in this reform. So my message yesterday to the Chiefs was exactly that these are the 2 uniqueness factors that exist in Ontario. As well, there is a function called the BANREP function that's been a function in our region for a very long time. That has different variances through the country, but with this proposed settlement as well, or proposed reform, that function becomes a more robust function for other regions. So there are a number of factors that we have helped negotiate into this proposed reform that will definitely benefit other regions across Turtle Island.
Now, of course, it's $47.8 billion, but that's split, as you know, across the country now. It may seem like a lot of money, but is that going to be enough to your chunk to satisfy sort of the remote needs of Ontario and things like that?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of considerations in service delivery. Unfortunately in the last 2 years we have seen inflation at an all-time high, which means that it's driving the cost in all sectors, whether it be from service delivery to food to all communities, whether they're remote or urban. And so those considerations are built in here a bit. Will there ever be enough resources to make sure all the needs are met? Not likely. Unfortunately, that's pretty common across the board in our communities, and that's a reality as it is. And so, but this will definitely bring investments that bring up at least closer to par, if not on par, with other services available to non-Indigenous people.
Okay, and you heard some of the discussions. Obviously, some of the Chiefs are concerned. There's a lot of talk, basically. Now, I know that the National Chief addressed some of it, but should the Chiefs have anything to fear in voting in favor of this agreement?
Would you repeat that, please?
Should the Chiefs have anything to fear in voting in favor of this agreement?
Well, I mean, obviously in any reform or settlements or offer from the government, we're always apprehensive. We're not sure, we have a long history with the Crown and it hasn't always been a good one. And so when the government brings a package to you and says this is what's in the best interest of you, I think that to raise an eyebrow and dig into it a bit more deeper is not unwarranted. And so we have seen, different times when the government's proposed reform that hasn't worked. But I will say that in this area, we do have the foundation of the tribunal orders that exist saying Canada must stop discriminating. And so that helps build the basis. And so from that, we have negotiated different elements into this agreement, and I think that are beneficial.
And one of the criticisms we've heard, of course, is that it was negotiated behind closed doors. The Child and Family Caring Society wasn't involved. There wasn't enough consultation. From the Ontario standpoint, the Chiefs of Ontario, is that a fair criticism? Do you feel that your communities were consulted fairly?
Well, I mean, so one of the differences, right, and that I have said publicly, is that we have been at the table since the beginning, and so we intervened in 2009 in the tribunal case. The decision was made in 2016 that the discrimination was happening. We have been involved all the way along. So, other regions have not been. Other regions have relied upon the AFN to represent them and support them. I can't speak to the mechanics of how the AFN supports those other regions, but I can tell you that in our region, we're doing our best to make sure that our regional chiefs, our chiefs in our region, are aware of the processes that are happening and what it means to them.
And one of the other things I heard yesterday, and I'm quoting the National Chief again, but is that this is really First Nations and their children and the community's money, not necessarily child welfare agencies' money, and that really it should be in the hands of the chiefs to decide, and they should have this money as they see fit. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, around the prevention aspect is definitely should be with the communities. If there's, the child welfare systems, at least in Ontario, and I can't imagine in other parts of this country, they have a stigmatism and a long history with our people. And so for them to be able to say, well, we want to support families from going into the system, really should be taken with a bit of a more wider lens. But when communities want to stop their children from going into care and want to support families to ensure that they are safe and that they have the resources that are needed so they're not in compromising positions, I think that's a good thing. And so for communities to be able to have additional resources to do that work is extremely important.
What about the Indigenous child welfare agencies, though? Should still sort of come through the First Nation and then they get the money, or how should that work?
So that's until the Constitution changes and that the responsibility for child protection is not with the provinces, then we're going to continue to have agencies across Turtle Island that are confined by the provincial legislation and how they protect children. And so I think that C92 is a good aspect to help build upon that, but it definitely, First Nation agencies across Turtle Island are confined by the realities of the legislation in the provinces in which they exist. And so, those colonial legislations have been around for a long time. Yes, there have been lots of regions where they have modernized, there are collaborative, there are Indigenous agencies, but they still are restricted by the provincial legislation that governs them.
Okay, well, we'll unfortunately have to end it there for time purposes, but thanks once again. Always a pleasure to meet with you and talk to you today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Coming up, we'll have a couple of interviews that were recorded before the Assembly. The first is with Tsilhqot'in Nation Chief Joe Alphonse, who does not support the FSA. And then we'll have the Caring Society's Cindy Blackstock, who is also a critic of the agreement. Welcome back. One of the First Nations that is against the $47.8 billion draft final settlement agreement as it stands is the Tsilhqot'in National Government in BC. Tsilhqot'in sent out a press release stating concerns with how the agreement was reached and how funding will be allocated. Tsilhqot'in Tribal Chair Joe Alphonse joined me to talk about some of his community's concerns. Welcome to Nation to Nation. Thanks for joining us today.
John and Leon, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right, and just as we were talking a little bit on the lead up there, I know that Tsilhqot'in sent out this press release urging the chiefs to vote against the draft final settlement agreement. So we talked a little bit about it a few minutes ago, but can you just sort of outline some of the concerns you have with the FSA as it stands now?
Yeah, I think we don't support the agreement. I think it's a good opportunity to work together as First Nation people across this country, and I think that's seeing the way it's negotiated. We don't feel like we've been included in that negotiation, and I think that's disrespectful. I also feel, Cindy Blackstock has been a big part of this. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her, and she fought for this when no one else will. And I think it's very disrespectful to not include her. And I think, that stems right from the very top of chieftainship of AFN. They want to gain recognition. They should show leadership. part of showing leadership is acknowledging who's done the work and who stood out. And so for me, I think the current AFN chief is really showing a lack of leadership here.
So I think you want to see agreement, obviously, but what do you think could be done maybe to improve the agreement now as it stands?
It has to be include all leadership from across this country and be inclusive. It means all of the rulings that came down have to all be recognized. So by signing this and agreeing to this agreement, it actually lets Canada off the hook on a lot of issues, and that's not why we're here. We spent a lot of time, my whole career, fighting for Aboriginal rights and title, and we're the only nation to win Aboriginal title in this country or anywhere in the world. So we're not just going to give away our stuff. We're gonna fight hard, and we have to, and we want full control and recognition. Canada's done some very harmful things to our people in the past, and they have to pay. So why let them off the hook? They never went easy on us.
What about you mentioned sort of consultation? I know that the meeting was originally scheduled, I think last month, and supposed to be in September in Winnipeg. Got delayed to do some more consultation. Have you? Has the AFN reached out to your community to discuss the agreement, or they made sure you understand it, or what sort of contact have you had with them?
We haven't had any contact directly with AFN. I think they've held a meeting here in Vancouver, but yeah, but I don't go to those meetings and stuff. I have my own lawyers, and I think I have probably the best Aboriginal right and title lawyer in all of Canada working for me. So I don't need to run off anywhere else and try to get figure out what everybody's thinking. I think I'm grown up enough to feel comfortable with whatever position we feel fits Tsilhqot'in. And this agreement is not a good fit for us. Might be for everyone else, but not for us.
And speaking of that, I understand you probably are in contact with other First Nations leaders in BC. Have you got any? What's their thoughts on the agreement?
I don't really have any contact with any of the other chiefs. I think we're renegades here. So I don't really hear too much. My focus is always Tsilhqot'in and Tsilhqot'in Nation, and then Tsilhqot'in is the community that I'm from. So I focus on that. So I don't attend a lot of meetings unless I'm asked to speak. So I'm not really too sure where people are at with this. But what I do know is for us, this is not acceptable, and I know in the past we've gone through something similar with Cindy Platt, what Cindy's going through right now with Tsilhqot'in. We fought long and hard for Aboriginal right and title, and when we got it, it seemed like we got blacklisted by AFN, and I think she's going through the same thing. So we know what she's going through. That's wrong. AFN wants credibility. They should show respect. Show leadership. As Indigenous peoples, we can be hard on each other, but we're also very forgiving with one another. But we have to walk through each other's doors and be honest. This is our feelings. We're not saying this to offend anyone. If other nations think that's fine, that's their business, not mine. So we're okay with that. But for us, we're not in support of this, and that's unified across our whole nation.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there for time purposes, but once again, thanks very much. I know you're busy, and thanks very much for talking to us today.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Tafti. Now and all seen.
After the break, we'll talk to Cindy Blackstock. She also says the FSA should be rejected in its current form. Welcome back. The First Nations Child and Family Caring Society also says the final settlement agreement should be rejected and has issued a report card on the agreement. Caring Society Executive Director Cindy Blackstock joined me to talk about some of her organization's concerns. She was in Kamloops, BC. So welcome back to Nation, Cindy.
Thank you for having me, Fraser.
All right, so I guess I would start first with consultation. It appears the Caring Society has a number of problems on a number of levels with how this agreement has been drafted and who was consulted. So maybe you could start just by telling me some of your concerns there.
Well, I think one of the major concerns is that Canada has not discharged its duty to consult with First Nations directly. And that's problematic when Canada is relying on other organizations to do the work that it's legally obligated to do directly with rights holders. The second concern is that the agreement was drafted in a way that didn't align up with the direction that the chiefs had given the parties back in 2022. So the direction was like, go out there and consult with regional experts because, oh my gosh, we've got so many people working in First Nations child welfare for like decades. Bring in the best of their wisdom, come back to the chiefs with options, including all the material, and then let them make their decision. The direction was not just to come with one agreement. The third thing is to preserve the right to go back to the tribunal and get some help ordering Canada to do things that it may have not otherwise agreed to. And that also is not in this agreement. So the process, I think, needs to be opened up and it needs to be brought into alignment with that resolution that the chiefs have already directed.
Now, there's also the issue of, it sounds kind of the agreement was from what we take largely sort of drafted with Cindy Woodhouse, the national chief of the AFN and the federal government, but I don't think some of the other organizations that have interest in this, including the Caring Society, were included in those discussions, if I'm correct.
No, we were not. We were a party of an agreement in principle, and that led to this agreement. But what happened in there is that Canada breached it by continuing to violate the Jordan's Principle orders. And there was a term in there, Fraser, that said if you can't bring a non-compliance order against Canada to hold them accountable when they're hurting kids. So we left in December 2022 to bring that non-compliance order, which your network covered in September. The hearings were in September. And it also included a provision to say that, you know, all the discussions were confidential. And that has always been a bit of a problematic thing for the Caring Society because we're mindful these are not our kids. These kids belong to 633 very different First Nations. And if we're trying even our very best in a closed room to come up with solutions that are going to affect that kind of group, we're not going to come up with the best deal. It's best to have everybody's views involved, and that way we come up with the best thing for kids. And in fact, that's how we've done it for the last 18 years. So this is a real change of course, this closed negotiation process.
Okay, and there's also the issue of we, for sure, I guess, within a year from now, we'll have a federal election, but that could be sooner because there's a minority government and there's already quite a heated parliament going on with lots of partisans sort of back and forth this fall. But the Caring Society has raised concerns about how binding this agreement would be should the current government fall and there's a new government in place. Could you maybe outline some of those for me?
Yeah, like actually, I think some of the most important sections of this agreement are way in the back, from 379 to 383. And in paragraph 383, it says, all the financial commitments that Canadians are making every year is subject to a parliamentary vote or any other approval process Canada deems necessary. And that's not defined. So really, in our view, this is a one-year funding agreement with 8 years further for possible funding, but it's not locked in. And they want to get rid of all the tribunal's orders and the tribunal itself to end its jurisdiction and be replaced by a First Nations alternative dispute resolution mechanism. Well, that sounds like a really good idea, and I support that kind of concept. But it turns out that dispute resolution mechanism couldn't order Canada to pay more money if it was needed, and also can't deal with systemic issues. So it really doesn't have teeth. And that is going to be hard to hold Canada accountable. Really important. This deal is only for 10 years. We're already in year 1 of it. We have 9 years left, and there's nothing binding to hold Canada accountable for not hurting our kids after that.
You also, you mentioned the Alternative Dispute Resolution Tribunal. You also have some other issues as well from reading the report card. Is there anything else you want to say about the way that's set up?
Yeah, on the dispute resolution mechanism. So one of the concerns we have about it is its limited jurisdiction. And also that Canada plays a larger role in that in terms of appointing the president. Now, I was happy to see amendments come out just a matter of days ago that suggested that there might be a more open appointment process, so that person's First Nations. But that on its own is not going to cut it. We really need to have Canada out of the picture. They shouldn't have a hand in choosing the process that's going to hold them accountable. The other thing is there's a cultural officer that's going to be appointed, but that's actually an employee of the government of Canada. So the whole thing, I think, could use a refresh and really benefit from the amazing work that folks like Naomi Metallic have done on Indigenous-based alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that can work for kids.
All right, and there's also the distribution model that I think the Caring Society, from my taking your report card, that it's too vague. The federal government did release a breakdown, but it just gives the money per province and territory. It doesn't really give much more. So what's your problems, I guess, there?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is, yeah, it's just a big number with very general breakdowns. And the breakdowns that are being delivered to First Nations are only for 1 year. Like, if this actually is a legit $47.8 billion deal, then why isn't Canada transferring all the money into a First Nations trust and letting it First Nations draw down? They're not giving you the monies for the future years because they're all subject to that, any other approval process and parliamentary procedures.
Okay, well, we'll have to end it there for time purposes, but as always, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Fraser. And, my respects to all the chiefs next week. They have a very difficult decision, and I really hope that Canada gives them the financial support to be able to do the independent analysis that their kids and their families deserve, and they deserve too.
Okay, well, thanks again.
All the best.
That concludes this week's episode of Nation to Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.